Today we made this really, Today we made the silver and turquoise ring. The goal with this video was to show you how to make a really easy ring with as few tools as possible and really cheap, simple tools. Because a lot of people aren't gonna wanna spend $2,000 on the really high-end tools to make a ton of rings, when most people just wanna make 1 or 2 rings and call it good. The tools that we're gonna use to make this ring are a third hand with a set of reverse tweezers on it, a flat file, a pair of pliers without any teeth, silver, turquoise that we're going to use for the stone, some cutters, some easy solder, some handy flux, a brush for the flux, and a torch. We're going to make the ring from 1mm square sterling silver, but I thought it'd be kind of cool to show you how this rolling mill works. So we're going to use this scrap piece and run it through this rolling mill. But basically all it is 2 big steel rollers and this adjustment up here that squeezes the rollers together. So basically what you're doing is pushing this through, and every time you push it through, you squeeze those rollers down tighter and tighter until you get the right width and length that you want. Now that we've run it through the rolling mill, it's work hardened pretty hard. It's not holding shape anymore, and it's got a lot of tension in it. So what we're going to do is heat it up in a process that's called annealing, which is heating it up to a point where all the molecules kind of spread back out and soften it up again, so that now you can see it's able to hold a shape, it's a lot more flexible, and a lot easier to work with. I'm going to make this ring a size 6. So I mark it with my caliper at 52mm, and then I'm going to leave a little bit of extra room to compensate for the width of the silver, and then also to leave enough room that I can file it flat so I can get a good soldering joint. Now I'm going to take a flat file and square off the ends of the silver. And the reason you do this is so you can get as much contact area on your soldering joint as possible. And a good way to do this is lay your silver down flat on something that has a really sharp cornered edge, a 90-degree edge, and just run it back and forth and keep it as straight as possible. Next, you're going to clean up the area that you're going to have soldered. And the reason you do that is solder doesn't like to flow on dirty surfaces, and so you want to just take a file or some sandpaper and get a nice clean surface and rough the surface up, because solder also doesn't like to run on a shiny surface. The next thing we're going to do is bend your piece of silver into a D shape. You want the 2 ends to be on the straight part of the D. And what that does is it allows the silver to lay completely flat so that you can line up those hard edges face to face and as flat as possible. A good way to tell if you've got it lined up perfectly is hold your piece of silver up to the light. And if you see any light coming through, you need to fix your joint. Now that you've got it all lined up, we're going to put our flux on. I just use handy flux. It's just a really cheap alternative to really expensive jeweler's flux. And you just want to coat the area. Make sure that you're hitting all the area around the soldering joint, because if it doesn't have flux on it, it's not going to allow the solder to flow all the way through the joint. Now we're going to do the actual soldering. There's a bunch of different techniques you can use to solder. I like to use 2 hands and keep a thin little piece of solder in some pliers and touch it as I go and apply the solder manually. Then I just douse it in some water, let it cool down, and now we're going to work on our prongs. Just like soldering, there's a bunch of different ways you can build prongs. This is the easiest way I've found. Basically all you do is take 2 longer strips of silver, put it in a pair of pliers, and bend it into a U shape. And what you're going to do is take the bottom of those U's and solder that together. So what you're going to do is heat it up and do the same thing we did with soldering the band. Get it to a nice dull red, and then touch your solder to it, and make sure you apply enough flux that the solder is going to run, and let it solder. So clean up both the surfaces, get them nice and flat. Now we're going to add some flux to the joint, and I just clamp these in some reverse set of pliers on the 3rd hand. Now that it's soldered, we're going to douse it in some more water and put it in our pickling bath. And if you don't have some pickling compound, you can just sand it off. It does the same thing. Now that it's pickled, we're going to take it out of the bath and put it on a mandrel and take a soft mallet and form that ring into an actual ring. Next, we're going to start bending our prongs up. You want to take the general shape of the stone and start bending it up at an angle to be able to fit that stone in the base of the prongs. Once you've got the prongs bent up and you know the general shape and length of how the prongs are going to be, you can just take some snippers and cut off the extra. But just be careful that you don't cut too much, because if you cut too much, you're going to end up having to re-solder some new prongs on and take your old prong setting off. Now you can take your flat file and file the ends of the prongs and take off all those sharp edges. Before we set the turquoise, we're going to take some sandpaper and sand the entirety of the ring, because we're going to put a brush finish on the ring. But if you want to put a polish finish on it, you can run it through the grits of sandpaper up to 500 grits and then take some polishing compound and polish it. To start setting the stone, open up your prongs and set your stone into the setting. Then take your pliers and bend the prongs into the shape that it needs to be to hug the stone, and take the very end of the prong and start pulling it over so it can hug the top of the stone. And now that your stone's finally set, you can put your finishing touches on it, finish polishing it, sand the prongs where you might have marred it up with the pliers. And then for the next couple weeks, you just want to keep your eye on it and make sure it's not getting loose and that your prongs are going to stay where they're at. And that is how you make a really simple turquoise ring. This project used very few tools, and all the tools that it did use were really cheap and affordable. This is a good project for people who are starting out with silversmithing or people who are wanting to get a little more into it. We're also going to be doing some more videos on some of the more skills like soldering and silver manipulation. And we're also going to do some more rings that are a lot harder than this one, that take more steps and probably take 2 or 3 videos to show. If you want to see some more videos like this, drop us a like and a subscribe, and we'll be able to keep putting out some more content.